When life expectancy in an advanced country goes backward, I don't think there's any clearer sign of an emergency. I mean, that's the one thing you can't fake, when people die.
We are the only G7 country that has a life expectancy of under 80 years. And supposedly we're the richest country in the world, supposedly. Now there's a lot of things contributing to that. Everyone
of course
sees it all their own way, and there's a lot of things contributing to it. But
it's an emergency.
It's an absolute crisis. And I'm telling you, this divergence between this income inequality is another real emergency.
I couldn't agree more.
It changes the kind of country we live in. It's not the kind of country, I don't care whether you're well off or not, it's not the kind of country you want your children living in. It's not America. And we have to do something about it. And I believe this is the motivation for Donald Trump. This is the motivation for the people in his administration who are informed on these issues. Some of them obviously deal with other kinds of issues.
It's bad for everybody. It's actually bad for the rich as well as the poor when you have a stratified class system like we're getting, which didn't exist. And by the way, spend 3 weeks in Australia, which is a country with a lot of problems, but it's still a middle-class country, and you can feel it in the way people talk to each other, in their attitudes. We're all sort of in this together. You do not get that sense in a pyramid-shaped social structure at all. And that's the biggest change of my lifetime, is the end of the middle class as a majority and the end of the egalitarian spirit that defined America, that Anglo-egalitarianism, which is not a feature of other countries. So, no, I couldn't agree more. It makes me hate the people in charge for ignoring this stuff. So what do you do about it?
So the first thing you do is you acknowledge you have a problem. Second thing you do is you put your finger, what is the nature of the problem? The problem is industrial policies of other people. Now, this is a really important point, Tucker. The president and some others will say the tariffs are different. They're ripping us off on tariffs. And for sure, that's true. But in terms of what is causing the harm to the economy, I would say, but particularly to America, the most important thing is not tariffs. Tariffs are the most visual thing, the easiest to see. But the real problem goes far deeper than that. So that if you end up with equal tariffs, you will still have a catastrophe for America. It will not resolve the issue at all. So what are the things in industrial policy that tilt the scale against, we would say, open markets and free trade and fair competition? All right, they are everything from the banking system. So in China, they have a banking system. They tell you to put your money in the bank. They make you have low interest rates. They take the money, they can loan it to manufacturing at what we would consider to be a below market rate, and that encourages manufacturing. And they've done that. They've increased that. Those loans from $60 billion a few years ago, this is according to the New York Times, to almost $700 billion in the last year or so, but for a year. So it's the banking, it's the labor system. If you have a system that keeps labor from getting its fair share of the pie, you're keeping wages down because of it, because of the statutory system. An example of that is this hukou system in China, where you can't really move around and be part of the system and get wages, just kind of stay where you were born. But there are lots of other ones, not allowing unions, not allowing organization, there's a lot of in the labor law. But it's subsidies, it's denying market access, it's fake non-scientific standards to get products. It's value-added tax. It's a tax system.
And explain that a little more. Fake standards.
So it's one of the big things we have. Fake is see, that just shows you that I'm a Trump person, right? So a person, a more sensible person than me, would say non-scientific sort of standards. So I mean, you could take a case as like a simple case that how long should a tractor have to brake before it stops? And you could say, okay, fine, safety is, I'm making these numbers up, safety is 40 feet, and maybe the Europeans would say, well, it's got to be 10 feet. We have to be very safe. And the net of that would be to eliminate products coming in, that kind of a standard. So it's or health and safety. For example, the Europeans saying chicken shouldn't come in if you chlorinate it. That is to say, when you're done, you put chlorine on it to make sure there's no micro organisms. They would say, well, that's unsafe. So it's sort of non-scientific standards like that. And there's a lot of them.
Which are in effect trade barriers.
They're absolutely trade barriers. Everything I'm talking about either basically shifts national wealth from consumers to manufacturers to give them an edge. And the tax system, currency manipulation, there's all these things. These things are, the point I'm trying to make is, are multiples in terms of importance versus tariffs. If we have equal tariffs with everyone in the world at zero, for example, we won't have a middle class, we won't have manufacturing, because all these other factors will give them this unfair, uneconomic advantage. And we can go through, and the president, to his credit, in his truth, where he laid this out, he said it's not just tariffs; it's all these other things. And the Jameson Greer, the USTR, is looking at all these other things. But when we think of the kind of migration for me, let me just say, was like, okay, we need free trade, and then you said, okay, we need fair trade. The reality is, you can't get fair trade because there's too many ways to twist it. What we really need, I've evolved to, is balanced trade. We need a system that enforces kind of trade balance, not with countries, but globally. Countries shouldn't be able to be huge surplus countries year after year, like China, of course, being the worst example, but also Germany. Ireland is evolving to that. And there's a bunch of other countries we could talk about. Countries shouldn't be able to do that. And so you say, well, how do you achieve that? You really need to put in place, I would say, some kind of tariffs to offset this fundamental unfairness. You're not just offsetting their tariffs. Europe's 10% on autos, we're 2.5%. If Europe went to zero, we still wouldn't sell very many cars in Europe. We just wouldn't. Our companies basically make small trucks. They don't need them there. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of reasons why that wouldn't happen. But what you need, you can't have countries have huge trade surpluses over long periods of time. You have to enforce, and you have to penalize countries that have surpluses all the time, and let countries that have deficits all the time get back to balance. If you do that, you then get the benefits of trade. So how do you get to balanced trade? There's basically three ways you can get to balanced trade. One is the way that Warren Buffett talked about in this article, and it's a wonderful article. I recommend anyone to read it. I would just Google Warren Buffett Squanderville, because he talks about Squanderville and Thriftville, and it's a short article. It's very nice.
2003.
Yeah, it was 2003. And he says what we should do is have export-import certificates. So in order to import, you need an export certificate. So you want to bring in T-shirts, you go to a steel mill and say, okay, fine, you export it, I want to buy that. And that would get you to balance. And I would certainly support that. Another way you could do it is you could put, and this is a little more complicated, you could put a tax on the money that comes back, this $23.5 trillion, this $1 trillion so that comes back every year where they buy U.S. assets. You could tax that. So that really wasn't worth $1. It was only worth 80 cents. In that case, there would be less incentive for people to run up these surpluses. That's called a capital access fee, and there are people that have proposed that, and that also would work. And then there's tariffs. So I prefer tariffs, one, because people understand them. Two, every country in the world has a system set up to deal with tariffs right now. They all have the legality. They all have the process of how to do it. They're flexible. You can move them around based on need to get to your objective of balance. But any three of those things would work, and I just think, and obviously the president thinks that tariffs are the simplest, easiest, most understood way to kind of do it. And the objective has to be to offset all unfairness and to move towards, over a period of time, move towards balance and ultimately have balanced trade. If you had balanced trade, you'd have another $1 trillion worth of domestic GDP, right? I mean, it would be a huge boom, and most of it would be, or a lot of it would be in manufacturing, and things spun off by manufacturing. And that's what the president is trying to do. He's trying to get us to use tariffs to move towards balance, to get a better distribution of wealth within our country so that working people end up with a higher percentage of the wealth. And we have this economic boom that's going to come by from reducing that huge perennial trade deficit.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.